Welcome everyone to another Mastering the Draw video. Today we're going to be touching on Colorado point system, and we're going to be touching on the preference point draw and the difference between that and a weighted point draw. So jump right into this. We'll start off by discussing preference points. So how do we accumulate preference points? Basically, you can get 1 point per year. And that's in the form of either an unsuccessful first choice application, or if you put down points, a points only option on that first choice. And the reason I say first choice application is because if you apply as a second choice and you draw that, you do not burn any points, and you will acquire or accumulate a preference point for that first choice application because you were unsuccessful or you had put in the points only options. So that's important to understand when you're putting in your choices and your selections first through fourth choice. So how do they work? A preference point is basically the most points that applicant has going into the draw for that specific hunt. That's who will get the tag. So here's an example. Let's say you had 10 tags available for a specific hunt, and you had 5 applicants that applied with 8 points, you had 4 applicants that applied with 7 points, and then you had 10 applicants that applied with 6 points, so on and so forth down the line, down to 0 points. So because there's only 10 tags available, immediately those the guys with 8 points, the 4 are gonna come right out of the top. Then the next group of applicants are gonna come out of that 5, which is gonna drop them down to the 6 point level. And because there's too many applicants in that 6 point level for the amount of permits remaining, there's gonna be a random draw within that point level. But that's the only time it's a random draw. Anybody that applied with under 6 points has 0 shot of getting a tag. So it's important to look up the draw odds on our website and read through that in our magazines when we talk about how many points it took the prior year. That's a finite number. Now, it doesn't typically go down, but a lot of times it can stay within that level or increase. So when you look down through that, just make sure that if you're applying for a unit, where you're at in point range with the amount of points it took for that unit to draw or that hunt to draw last year. So the different big game species that have preference points or that run off of a preference point draw. So deer, elk, antelope, and bear all run off a preference draw. So when you look at hunts for those species, it's important to note the amount of points it took to draw the prior year for that hunt for those species, because all of those operated on a preference draw. Okay, so now we're gonna jump to a hybrid draw. And the hybrid draw was introduced some years ago, and basically what the hybrid draw is it allows applicants that don't have the maximum number of points for some of these units that take an exorbitant amount of points. I'll just read from the regs. And again, you can find this right here in the 2021 big game regulations. But basically what it says is hunt codes require 10 or more preference points to draw, and this is based on a 3-year average from the 2009 drawing. Up to 20% of the available licenses may be issued through a random drawing. Now, there is some qualifiers in place for applicants to put in for this. The applicant must have at least 5 points or more in order to be considered in the hybrid draw. I can still put in for the hunt, but if you don't have at least 5 points or more, then you won't be eligible for it. Hunters must apply as an individual when participating in the hybrid draw as well. You cannot apply as a party if you're gonna be considered in the hybrid draw. The biggest caveat to the hybrid draw is that there has never been a non-resident draw a deer or elk tag out of the hybrid draw. The only species they've actually drawn, the non-residents, I should say, have actually drawn for is antelope and bear. So the reason being is because they conduct the regular draw before doing the hybrid draw, because they separate that 20% out. And by the time they get to the hybrid draw, when they start sorting down through the random applicants, the non-resident quota is filled for deer and elk. Now, antelope and bear, a lot of times there's as many resident applicants that have points or more points than non-resident applicants in those draws. So oftentimes there could be a chance to where when they start going down through that, there could still be a non-resident quota remaining in place when they get to the hybrid draw, and then a non-resident could draw that tag. But again, that's never happened for deer and elk, so it's almost a moot point, but it's worth mentioning. So now let's touch on the weighted point system. So how do we accumulate weighted points? It's a little bit trickier than preference points, with the exception that it's only one a year, same as preference points. The key is the first 3 years that you apply for, sheep, moose, or goat, which I'll touch on later, but the first 3 years you're applying, you're actually accumulating preference points. It's not till after year 3 that you will start accumulating weighted points for each year. Now, the way weighted points work is it's basically like a bonus point. I mean, there's a different nuance to get there, but in essence, it just gives you a better chance of drawing that tag the more weighted points you accumulate. So, as we touched on earlier, the big game species that use this weighted point draw, Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep, moose, and mountain goat. Now, all of these species, especially when it comes to an antlered moose, a Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep ram tag, or any of the mountain goat, are gonna require over the number of preference points. So you're gonna be, over that 3+. Now, once you get into that plus, that's where I'm talking about the weighted points. So a lot of times if you hear people say 3 + 5 or 3 + 7, the 7 and the 5, that is referring to the amount of weighted points they have, and basically it's a random draw where you're just getting a better chance technically of drawing that tag the more weighted points you accumulate. Now, where this can be a little tricky is the way that this point draw, or this weighted point draw, is set up is the first 3 years while you're accumulating preference points, you do get preference in the draw. So in the case of antlerless moose or sheep tags, oftentimes we see applicants that go in that draw out at 2 points. They don't even have weighted points, or 1 point, or actually 0 points. So it's important when you're applying for those, and typically that's a non-resident issue. Residents will typically be up in the weighted point category to draw these tags, but non-residents, you could draw within the first 3 years, and if you do, then if there was, let's say, here's an example, there was 2 tags for a moose, for an antlerless moose hunt, and there was, 2 guys that applied with 2 points and 5 guys that applied with 1 point. The 5 guys that applied with 1 point had 0 chance of drawing because of the 2 applicants with the 2 preference points. And that's an important thing, is you're still drawing off that preference point system the first 3 years. After that, it converts to a weighted point system, and then it's a random draw. So it's important to note that. The desert sheep, that does not have any point system at all. Not a preference, not a weighted, nothing. It's completely random. So that's an easier way if you just want a chance to draw a sheep tag right out of the gate. Throw in for desert sheep, and it's not a big deal. The one thing that I will mention, when you're accumulating points for these species, it is going to cost you $100 per point. So if you want to avoid paying that $100 per point, the desert sheep is a good substitute species, because it's only going to cost you the $9 application fee. They do have the system set up to where you can opt out of buying that point. So you don't have to pay that $100. You can still put your application in. But as I said before, if you're planning on even having a chance in the draw, you have to get past those first 3 years up into the weighted point category, because the first 3 years you're applying, you're basically drawing dead. You don't have a chance in the draw if the hunt you're putting in for requires weighted points to be able to draw. So that's why the weighted point draw system is a little bit trickier than the preference draw system, because if that particular hunt you're applying for, let's say all the applicants that applied for that had 3+ and had weighted points, and that's where the applicants were drawing out at, you would have to apply for at least 3 years and acquire points the entire time. Once you get into that weighted point category, then you have a chance in the draw, but not until then. The only time you would have a chance at drawing a tag before that 3-year period of accumulating points would be the antlerless moose or the ewe sheep. So try not to confuse this too much, but some of the nuances are a little confusing. Thanks for watching. We appreciate all the views and appreciate any questions. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and we'll get back with you. And remember, if you enjoy these videos and find them informational and helpful, please subscribe.